Welcome to the MAM Journals. When I popped into my local BMW dealer recently, which is North Oxford Garage, they very kindly said, would you like to borrow the new GSA? And obviously I said yes. They said, but if you don't mind, on this occasion, rather than have it for 2 or 3 days, which you normally do, could you just take it for 1 day? Now, I can understand that. The bike is in busy demand, and therefore I had to make a decision. Do I want to do a static review and talk through the bike, or do I actually want to go for a ride? Well, to be honest, I'm a motorcyclist first and a YouTuber second, so it didn't take me long to decide what I'd like to do was take it out on the road. What I've done today is we're going to film, and hopefully you're going to enjoy coming with me on part of my probably 130 mile ride today, and I'll be exploring what the bike's like, how do I get on with it, how am I finding it in town, what's it like in terms of controls and instrumentation, what's it like on bigger roads and dual carriageways, and of course how do I feel as a smaller rider about the weight and balance of the bike. I hope that you enjoy the video. Those familiar with the BMW range will obviously know what the GSA, i.e. GS Adventure, actually is. For those of you that don't, the Adventure is the huge one. My wife and I regularly travel to Spain on the bike, and we catch the ferry to and from Santander, and we actually amuse ourselves in the bar by spotting the GSA riders. They're normally 6'4", have size 13 feet, and are covered in Moroccan dust. Now, the basic specifications of the bike are similar between the two models, in so much as they're both fitted with an air-stroke liquid-cooled 4-stroke flat twin, with double overhead and chain-driven camshafts, and that system's called shift cam, and they have balanced gear wheels. Now, we know that engine as the Boxer. It produces 145 horsepower at 7,750 revs, and it produces an impressive 149 newton meters of torque at 6.5. In terms of emissions, this bike is compliant with the new Euro 5 Plus, which comes into force in January 2025. In terms of dimensions of the bike, now I say it's the big one. Well, if you think the standard bike has a seat height that varies between 850 and 870, the GSA is 870 to 890, and you can get a higher seat if 890 isn't quite high enough for you. They share rake of 26.2 degrees. The tank on the GS the standard bike is 19 litres, whilst the GSA has a massive 30 litres capacity. Not surprisingly, the bike, fully fueled, is significantly heavier. Now, the standard bike is in standard form, because it depends what spec you put on it, of course, is 237 kilos, whilst this Adventure is 269. That's 32 kilos heavier, or 70 pounds. Now, both bikes have the options to fit new technology which has been introduced with the new model. I'm particularly impressed, being slightly shorter in leg than some, with the adaptive ride height systems, which certainly makes them much more approachable. They've both got this new 2-part frame and gone away from the trellis system of the previous model, and they both benefit from more sophisticated electronic suspension. This particular bike is fitted with radar cruise control, and which sort of leads me nicely into what is the spec of the bike that I'm actually on. Well, this is the R1300 GS Adventure TE. The TE stands for Touring Edition, and it's got 3 packages on it. It's got triple black pack, which means comfort rider seat, comfort passenger seat, I think they mean heated by that, black cross-spoke wheels, and an aluminium sort of brushed finish fuel tank. It's got a touring package which gives you preparation for the GPS device, the pannier fastenings for aluminium cases, chrome exhausts, etc. And it's got the dynamic package, which is a sports brake, gear shift pro and riding mode pro. Other options that they chose to put on it, they went for the adaptive vehicle ride height, which I've just talked about, and they also went for Headlight Pro. Now, this bike in this format is an eye-wateringly expensive £24,230 in the UK, so this is an expensive bike. Like its little brother, the standard GS, the bike certainly feels more dynamic. The handling is tauter. I always found that the older GSAs, they sort of wallow a bit on transition from sort of side to side, and this bike certainly felt significantly more dynamic than the previous model. Modes and improved suspension, of course, are all helping with this. You have choices in basic format of rain, which is the softest of the settings, road, which is the medium, and dynamic, which is the most taut feeling. And because of how I like to ride my bikes, it's the mode that I most commonly use. It just helps the bike feel nicely poised. This is Lechlade, and I just wanted to show a little bit of me actually riding slowly in town. It is an easy bike to ride slowly, and it feels nicely balanced, nicely poised. Now, this is where I think for somebody like me of my stature, the adaptive ride height is particularly helpful, because below 15 miles an hour the bike lowers automatically, and as soon as you sort of go over there's a number of factors it's taking it, but it's about 30 miles an hour, the bike rises to its normal ride height, so you get the benefits of the handling whilst you get good foot contact. In terms of looking at this bike, one of the things people often comment on when they see them is, look at the width of that tank. You know, it's too wide to ride, but of course the width of the tank and indeed the engine is not your restraining factor when you're riding on a bike. It's normally the handlebars which are the widest point, and the bikes are very similar in measurement. My 1300 GS is 1000 millimeters, let's call it a meter, whilst the Adventure is 1012, so there's very little difference between it. And if you're sort of riding naked as I am, the bike is just as easy to filter whichever bike that you're on. Now, if you've got your caravan on the back, and I jest really, but the carrying capacity of this bike is enormous, then clearly it's the rear of the bike that you worry about when you're filtering. This is designed to carry a lot of weight, and I think is probably going to be very capable of doing so. Anyway, we made our way toward a cafe called Aviate, where I wanted to top up on my caffeine, and was beginning to get a little more comfortable with the bike and getting a feel for it. Now, off camera I did do a brake test on the bike. You can see on the sort of dash there, that's the sports dash I think they call that. You can see the little white lines where you can see how much brakeage I've used, and I think the brakes are good. They're nice and linear and progressive, and like my GS, I think they're improvements on the previous model. Now clearly if you're two up fully laden, like all bikes, you're going to have to pull a bit harder, but certainly solo I thought they were very good. I also took the opportunity to begin to sort of feel what the acceleration was like on this bigger, heavier bike. Now I've tried it in third, fourth and gear, but my 1300 is definitely faster and more responsive than my old 1250. Now this is the same engine, but the heavier GSA is still very responsive. I actually really like the power and torque delivery of this new engine. The gearbox is improved too in my view. Still very GS, it's not ultra slick or ultra smooth, but less clunky and easier to engage than the previous model. We made our way along a smaller lane up to the Aviate Cafe, and the bike feels actually very planted and secure. It's verging on agile. Now, this is the Cotswold Airport, which is actually an old RAF base. At one point, it was actually where the Red Arrows display team were based. But now, it's an active private airfield and a graveyard for commercial airliners. They use this 747 for guided tours and events. I think with all the additional marquees sort of going up around, they're planning some Christmas parties, which would be a fun place to have one. Now, caffeined up and changing the position of the camera so that you can see more, we headed north to Stow-on-the-Wold. We even had the audacity to overtake a few cars on the way. The more I rode this bike, the more comfortable I became. Knowing that I only had the bike for a short period, the one day that we talked about, I did try and pick roads I knew, so I didn't waste any time familiarising myself with where the road was going and could actually focus on understanding the bike. I think this is a very competent motorcycle. The suspension is good, the new Anarchy tyres okay, there's plenty of feedback, and I had no moments on it despite the farmer's best efforts. In fairness, it is a busy time of the year for them. This bike is not quite as agile as the lighter GS, of course, but it does somehow feel really planted. Now, clearly a sort of balanced review of this bike needs to include a part on dual carriageway. I wanted to do 70 miles an hour in 6th gear and pop the radar assisted cruise control on to see what it was like. I actually use my cruise control, which isn't radar assisted, a lot, particularly in what we call in the UK contraflows, which is where they're doing repairs on works and they've dropped the speed limit to 50 miles an hour. I find it keeps me out of trouble. You can see on this video just about, if you look for the symbols on the middle with the green symbol with a lane, you can see it's actually picking up a car in front quite a long way ahead. Sadly, I didn't have long enough to get familiar with the system and get it to activate, but I could see what it was doing, and I've certainly ridden these systems in the past, and I actually quite like them. I'm not sure I'd want to spend huge amounts of money to get one, but I can see the benefit. I'd like to spend a bit longer on this bike to understand how it works, and indeed how the rear-facing radar interfaces with the riding systems, but certainly easy to operate and, in my initial view, okay. As expected, this bike is completely at home on roads like this. It's comfortable and assured. It is designed, as you'd expect, to be a mile eater, and although I haven't tested it thoroughly, it probably is. Clearly, a 128 mile test can only give you a first impression of the bike. I've ridden 5,500 miles on my GS version, and I'm still learning how to get the best out of it and to use all the features properly. Reflecting, as I always do as I made my way back, I was actually impressed with the new GSA. It feels stable, responsive and mile-crunchingly comfortable. I particularly like the adaptive ride height and improved, more sophisticated suspension, and it is easier and at slower speeds safer to ride for those less tall. It goes, stops and handles well, certainly for a 269 kilo bike. The technology, once you've actually worked out how to use it, helps the rider and the bike. It is of course a lot of money, and it is very different from the old GSA, but in my opinion it still retains that GS spirit and character. Personally, I think the bike is better looking than the photos suggest, but I'll be the first to accept that looks are subjective. It is of course heavier. My standard 1300 felt like a 450 Supermoto when I got on it after this ride. It is a big bike and it's designed to accommodate bigger riders and a lot of luggage, but I found it surprisingly rideable for smaller riders like myself. I think the biggest compliment I can give this bike is that although I've always respected the old GSA, it was never a bike I would have considered. If I wasn't so happy with my 1300 GS, I would consider this. If somebody actually had said to me when I had my 1250 GS, do you want this or the new GSA? I'd choose the GSA, and that would not have been the case in the past. I do hope that you've enjoyed this short video, and I hope that you found it interesting and for some helpful. I'm looking forward to catching up with some of you on the channel soon, but in the meanwhile, ride safe, stay well.